It was a bright, sunny afternoon, and Jessica was feeling happy. She had spent the day with her father, Daniel, at a family gathering in the park. The air was fresh, and the sky was clear, perfect for a day out. Their family had gathered to celebrate a birthday, and everyone was laughing, talking, and enjoying the warm weather. Jessica loved these moments. Her father, Daniel, was always there for her, and she treasured their time together. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it was always with kindness. He had raised her alone after her mother passed away when Jessica was just a little girl. Over the years, Daniel became not just a father, but also a friend. They shared many quiet conversations, and today, with the park buzzing with life, Jessica knew this moment was one to remember. As the day went on, Jessica felt the need to capture this peaceful moment. With her phone in hand, she turned to her father, who was sitting on a bench nearby, talking to some family members. She asked, "Hey, Dad, want to take a picture with me?" Daniel looked up at her and smiled. "Sure, sweetheart, let's get a picture." Jessica walked over to him, her heart warmed by the simple joy of spending time with the person she loved most. She stood next to her father, who had his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling. The sun's rays hit them just right, creating a beautiful glow. It felt like the perfect moment, and she knew this was one of those memories she'd keep forever. She snapped the photo, checked it for a second, and then smiled. It was just a regular photo, nothing fancy, just the two of them enjoying a peaceful moment together. Jessica had no idea that this simple picture, this happy moment, would soon become something she'd never forget. The sounds of the park filled the air, children running around, friends laughing, and the distant hum of a nearby food truck. But in that little moment, all of that faded away. It was just Jessica and her father. She loved these moments. It was a rare thing to have time alone with him, now that she was older, with her busy job and life outside the family. But today, she didn't have to worry about anything. It was just the two of them, enjoying the afternoon. After taking the photo, Jessica slipped her phone back into her pocket and sat next to her father. They continued to talk with the family, sharing stories and catching up. Jessica felt content, knowing that this memory would be something special to look back on. It was a moment of love and laughter, a moment when nothing else mattered except being together. As the day slowly turned into evening, the family began to pack up and get ready to head home. Jessica looked over at her dad, who was still talking to some of the other relatives. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for him, for the love he had always given her, and for the bond they shared. It was these little moments that made life worth living, and Jessica was thankful for every single one of them. Little did she know that, later that evening, something would happen with the picture she took that would change everything. Later that evening, after the family had said their goodbyes and gone home, Jessica sat down at her kitchen table. Her phone, which had been buzzing with messages all afternoon, was now quiet. She had a few minutes of peace before the busy work week started again. As she sipped on a cup of tea, she thought about the fun day they'd had. It had been nice to take a break from the usual routine and just enjoy her dad's company. After a few moments, Jessica remembered the picture she had taken with her father earlier in the day. It had been such a nice moment, and she wanted to look at it again. She pulled her phone out of her bag and unlocked it, scrolling through the photos from the gathering. There were pictures of family members laughing, the food they had eaten, and the beautiful park setting. But it was the photo of her and her father that caught her eye. She smiled to herself as she clicked on the image. It was exactly how she remembered it, her dad's arm around her, both of them smiling wide in the warm sunlight. It looked like a perfect snapshot of happiness, nothing unusual or strange. But as she looked at it more closely, something began to feel a little odd. At first, Jessica couldn't put her finger on it. The photo was just a regular one, or so she thought. But as she zoomed in, she noticed something in the background. It was hard to explain, like a shadow or blur behind her father. Jessica blinked a few times, thinking it might be her eyes playing tricks on her. But the more she looked, the more the figure seemed to stand out. She zoomed in closer. There was definitely something there. It wasn't just a shadow or a reflection like she first thought. It was a faint, blurry shape, but it looked almost like a person standing behind her dad. The strange thing was, no one had been that close to Daniel when the photo was taken. In fact, she was sure there hadn't been anyone standing behind him. There was no one there when she had snapped the picture. Jessica's heart began to beat a little faster. She turned the phone sideways, trying to get a better look at the image, but the blurry figure didn't go away. It was still there, just behind her father's shoulder. The figure's outline was faint, but Jessica could clearly see that it looked like a person, someone she didn't recognize. It didn't look like any of the people who had been with them that day, not even in the background. Jessica sat up straighter, her mind racing. What was going on? Could it be a glitch in the phone's camera? Maybe the light had created a weird reflection, or there had been something in the background that she hadn't noticed before. She tried to reason with herself. It was probably just a trick of the camera, or maybe she had just imagined it. But the more she stared at the photo, the more unsettled she became. The blurry figure looked almost too real to be an accident. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why was this strange figure showing up behind her dad? Where had it come from? Jessica's fingers trembled slightly as she held the phone. She tried to calm herself down, but the uneasy feeling in her chest wouldn't go away. The figure seemed to be standing right next to her father, almost like it was trying to get his attention. Her eyes scanned the image again, looking for any explanation. Her mind raced with thoughts. Could someone have been standing just outside the frame of the picture? No, she was certain there had been no one there when the photo was taken. And yet, the figure was still in the picture. There was no mistaking it. She took a deep breath, trying to shake the feeling of anxiety creeping up her spine. But no matter how many times she looked at the photo, the figure remained. It was as if it had appeared out of nowhere. Jessica set her phone down on the table and ran her hands through her hair. Was it a trick of the camera? Or was there something else happening here? As Jessica sat there, staring at the photo of her and her father, a sense of panic began to rise within her. She couldn't explain it. The more she studied the image, the more certain she became that something was wrong. The blurry figure standing behind her father didn't make any sense. She had been with him the whole time, and no one had been that close to him during the picture. Her thoughts raced. Could it be a mistake? Maybe the phone's camera had a glitch, or there was something in the background that she hadn't noticed when she first took the photo. But as she zoomed in, she realized that the figure didn't look like any shadow or blur. It looked like a person, faint but clearly visible. It wasn't just a trick of the light. This was something else. Jessica's heart began to pound faster. She turned the phone sideways again, hoping that the figure might disappear, but it didn't. It was still there, just behind her father. She couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping up her spine. What was this? Who was that figure? And why was it only showing up in the photo? She placed the phone down on the table and stood up, walking around the room. Her mind was spinning. Maybe she was just overreacting. After all, it was just a picture. But no matter how much she tried to convince herself that it was nothing, the image kept coming back to her. It was like it was burned into her mind. Jessica's fingers fumbled with her phone as she picked it up again. She couldn't help herself. She had to keep looking at the photo, as if by looking at it one more time, the mystery would make sense. But it didn't. The figure was still there, standing just behind her father, its face unclear but unmistakably present. Her breath quickened as a wave of anxiety hit her. What if this wasn't a mistake? What if it was something more? Could the figure be something supernatural? She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. She didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that. But the more she looked at the image, the more she couldn't ignore the strange feeling that something wasn't right. Jessica ran her hands through her hair, trying to calm herself down. She told herself it was probably just a camera glitch or an optical illusion. After all, the phone's camera was new. and it sometimes acted up. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a glitch. This photo felt different. She glanced back at the photo again. There it was, the figure, standing so close to her father, as if it were part of the picture. Jessica's chest tightened. Was it someone she knew? Had someone been standing there the whole time without her noticing? No. She remembered the moment clearly. There had been no one there. Just her and her father, smiling together in the sun. Her mind raced with questions. Who was this mysterious figure? Why did it only show up in the photo? Was it a message? Was there something she was missing? Her hands began to shake, and she put the phone down again, feeling overwhelmed. Jessica took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had to get some answers. There was no way she could leave it like this, with so many questions unanswered. She had to find out what was going on with that photo. But who could she turn to? She thought for a moment, and then decided to show the picture to her best friend, Emily. Emily always had a logical explanation for things, and Jessica hoped she could help make sense of what she was seeing. Jessica quickly sent the photo to Emily with a message. "Hey, check this out. I'm starting to freak out. What do you think?" She stared at the phone, waiting for a reply. What would Emily say? Would she be able to explain it? Or would she be just as confused as Jessica was? The minutes felt like hours as she waited, her mind still racing with thoughts of the blurry figure behind her father. Was it just a trick of the camera? Or was there something more to it than that? Jessica sat on the edge of her couch, staring at her phone, her finger hovering over the screen. She had sent the photo to Emily over 20 minutes ago and was eagerly waiting for a response. Her mind was still racing with questions. Could this strange figure be a simple mistake, or was something else going on? Suddenly, her phone buzzed. Emily's message appeared on the screen. Jessica quickly opened it, her heart pounding. "Whoa, Jess. That's weird. I don't know what it is, but it's definitely not a glitch. That figure doesn't belong in the picture. Have you shown it to anyone else?" Jessica's stomach dropped. She had hoped Emily would have an explanation, something logical that would help her understand what she was seeing. But Emily was just as confused as she was. "I don't know what to think," Jessica typed back. "I've been staring at it for so long, and it's like the figure is staring right at Dad." Emily's reply came quickly. "I think you should show it to your dad. Maybe he knows something about it. But don't freak out. Just show him and see what he says." Jessica stared at Emily's message, considering the suggestion. She had already shown the picture to a few of her other friends, but no one seemed to have any answers. Maybe talking to her father about it would help. After all, he was the one in the photo, and maybe he could make sense of the strange figure behind him. Taking a deep breath, Jessica dialed her father's number. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, sweetie. What's up?" Daniel's voice sounded calm, just like it always did. "Hi, Dad. I need to talk to you about something," Jessica said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's about the picture I took of us at the park earlier today." "Sure. What about it?" Daniel asked, sounding curious. Jessica paused for a moment. "Well, I was looking at the photo, and there's something in it that doesn't make sense. There's this blurry figure behind you, and I can't explain it. It looks like someone standing there, but I'm sure no one was close to you when I took it." Daniel was silent for a moment. "A blurry figure. That's strange. Let me take a look at it." Jessica quickly sent the photo to him. A few seconds later, she got a text from her father. "I see it. That's definitely strange. I don't know who or what that could be, but I can tell you something. This kind of thing has happened before, but not in photos." Jessica's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, Dad?" She typed back quickly. "I'm not saying it's anything bad, but a few years ago, I went through a tough time. I had an accident, and after that, I started hearing strange things. Whispers, voices, stuff like that. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want to worry you, but maybe what you're seeing in the picture is connected to that." Jessica stared at the screen in disbelief. She had no idea about her father's experience. She never knew that he had gone through something so difficult. The thought of him being in pain without her knowing felt strange and sad. But now this picture made her wonder, was this mysterious figure somehow connected to those voices he had heard after the accident? "Dad," Jessica typed back, her hands shaking, "do you think that's what's in the photo? The figure, I mean. Could it be related to those whispers you heard?" "I don't know, sweetheart," Daniel replied. "But I don't think it's something to be afraid of. Whatever it is, it doesn't seem harmful. It's just strange. I guess some things can't be explained easily." Jessica sat back, her mind reeling with this new information. Her father's story made the figure in the photo seem even more mysterious. She had never heard him talk about this before, and now she was wondering if the photo was trying to show her something she didn't fully understand. Could the figure be a ghost, a sign from the past? Or was it something entirely different, something more personal to her father? One thing was for sure. This photo was no longer just a simple memory. It had become a puzzle, and Jessica was determined to solve it. After her conversation with her father, Jessica felt a strange mix of emotions. She was concerned, confused, and a little bit scared. Her father's past, his whispers, and the strange experiences he had gone through after his accident had never come up in their conversations before. She always saw him as strong, steady, and dependable. The idea that he might have gone through something so difficult without telling her made her feel closer to him, but it also added to the mystery surrounding the photo. She couldn't shake the image of the blurry figure standing behind her father in the park. It felt so real, so clear, and yet it made no sense. Her mind raced with questions. Was the figure connected to the strange voices her dad had heard? Had the figure been trying to show itself in the photo for some reason? Or was it just a coincidence? Jessica spent the next few hours scrolling through the photo again and again. She couldn't help herself. Every time she looked at it, the figure seemed to stare back at her, as if it was trying to say something. She zoomed in, studying the shape, trying to figure out what it was. The figure's outline was blurry, but it looked like a person, tall and thin, standing with their back to her father. She could make out a faint face, though it was hard to tell. But there was one thing that struck her more than anything, the feeling that this wasn't just a random mistake. She glanced over at her phone's screen, where Emily had sent her another message earlier. "I've been thinking about the photo. It's giving me a bad feeling. Maybe you should go back to the park and check the spot where you took the picture. It could help." Jessica wasn't sure why, but Emily's suggestion made sense. Maybe going back to the place where it all started would give her some answers. She decided to go back to the park the next morning, even though it was the last thing she felt like doing. But she had to know what was going on. The next morning, Jessica arrived at the park early, before anyone else was around. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a soft golden light over the trees and the wide grassy fields. It was peaceful, and the park looked so different in the quiet morning hours compared to the bustling family gathering the day before. She walked slowly toward the bench where she and her father had taken the photo. The air was still, and Jessica felt a bit of nervousness settle in her chest. She stood in the spot where they had taken the picture, her eyes scanning the area. There was no one around. Everything seemed calm and ordinary, just like it had the day before. She looked down at the ground, then glanced up at the bench where her dad had sat. It all seemed so normal, but there was a strange energy in the air that made her uneasy. She took out her phone, ready to take a new photo of the spot, to compare it to the one she had from the day before. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, and then she snapped a picture, trying to capture the exact spot where the mysterious figure had appeared. After taking the picture, Jessica stared at the screen, waiting for something, anything, to show up. But the image just looked like a normal photo of the park. Confused, Jessica looked around once more. Nothing seemed out of place. No figure, no strange shadows, just the quiet park, the trees, and the bench where she and her dad had sat. It was almost too normal. A sense of disappointment washed over her. She took another deep breath and turned around to leave, ready to head back to her car. But just as she took a step, something caught her eye. A movement in the distance, just beyond the park's tree line. Her heart skipped a beat. She froze, staring into the trees. Was it someone walking there, or was it something else? Her pulse quickened as she tried to make out the figure in the distance. The shape was blurry, just like the one in the photo. For a brief moment, Jessica thought she saw something that resembled the same figure. A tall, shadowy shape, standing still in the trees. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. The figure wasn't close, but it looked like it was watching her, just like it had in the photo. She reached for her phone again, her hand shaking slightly. But when she looked up, the figure was gone. The trees stood still, the park was silent, and there was no trace of anyone in the distance. Jessica stood frozen, staring at the spot where she had seen the figure. Her heart was racing, and she felt a cold chill run down her spine. She glanced around the park again, hoping to find some explanation for what she had just seen. But there was nothing, just the peaceful stillness of the trees and the open fields. The figure she thought she had seen was gone, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. It was early, and she was tired. Maybe the shadows from the trees had created the illusion of movement. Still, the strange sensation of being watched lingered, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. After a few moments, Jessica took a deep breath and decided to head back to her car. As much as she wanted answers, the eerie feeling in the air was starting to wear on her. She had come to the park, looking for answers, but instead, she felt more confused and unsettled than ever. Once she got back to her car, Jessica sat down behind the wheel, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She stared out the window, trying to process everything that had happened. The photo, the figure, her father's strange past. The movement in the trees. Nothing made sense. She couldn't help but feel like there was something she was missing. Something she wasn't seeing clearly. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was another message from Emily. "Hey Jess, I've been thinking a lot about that photo. Maybe you should try talking to a psychic or someone who knows about this kind of stuff. I mean, this is beyond normal, right?" Jessica read the message over a few times. A psychic. It sounded like something out of a movie, but then again, what else could explain what was happening? She thought about her father's story of hearing voices after his accident and the figure in the photo. Was it possible that there was something supernatural going on? Could the figure in the picture be a sign of something from the past? Or was it trying to communicate with her in some way? She shook her head. She didn't know if she believed in that kind of thing, but she was desperate for answers. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe talking to someone who understood these things would help. After a few moments of hesitation, Jessica decided to take Emily's advice. She searched online for a local psychic. There was one in town who had great reviews. Her name was Lydia, and she specialized in helping people understand mysterious or unexplained events. Jessica figured it couldn't hurt to try. She made the call, setting up an appointment for later that day. The moment the appointment was confirmed, a wave of uncertainty hit her. Was she doing the right thing? Would this person be able to help? Or was she just jumping at shadows? The hours passed slowly until it was time to meet with Lydia. Jessica drove to the small shop located on the edge of town. The building looked old, with faded signs and dark curtains in the windows. It felt like the kind of place people visited when they were looking for answers to things they couldn't explain. When Jessica stepped inside, the smell of incense filled the air, and soft, calming music played in the background. Lydia, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair, greeted her warmly. She led Jessica to a small, dimly lit room where a table with candles sat in the center. Lydia motioned for Jessica to sit. "So, my dear," Lydia said gently, "what brings you here today?" Jessica hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to start. I have a question about a photo I took with my dad." There's something strange in it, something I can't explain. And lately, I've been seeing things that don't make sense. I need help understanding what's going on." Lydia listened carefully, nodding as Jessica spoke. When she finished, Lydia leaned forward and said softly, "Sometimes, the past can reach out to us in strange ways. It seems like you are being called to understand something that might have been hidden for a long time." Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. Was it possible that the figure in the photo had something to do with her father's past, as he had mentioned? Was there a connection between the strange occurrences and the accident he had been through years ago? Lydia's voice broke through her thoughts. "We will find the answers, my dear. But be prepared. Sometimes, the truth is harder to face than we expect." Lydia's words hung in the air as Jessica sat at the table, her eyes focused on the flickering candles. A sense of both dread and hope filled her chest. What was this truth Lydia was talking about? Was she about to uncover something that had been hidden for years? Lydia closed her eyes for a moment and then spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "I can sense that something from your father's past is trying to reach you. It may not be something he is aware of, but it's connected to the figure you saw in your photo. I believe this figure is not just a ghost or a random image. It might be tied to a memory, something your father hasn't fully dealt with." Jessica felt a shiver run down her spine. "What do you mean? My father never mentioned anything like that. He always seemed so calm. He's never talked about anything that could explain this." Lydia nodded, understanding Jessica's confusion. Not all things are spoken. Sometimes, the past leaves marks we don't realize. The figure in the photo could be a symbol, or it could be something connected to an event your father experienced that he hasn't shared with you. This figure may have appeared to you because it wants you to help it find peace. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes wide. "But how could I help? I don't know anything about it. I didn't even know my dad had any kind of past like this." Lydia smiled gently. "It's not always about knowing everything. Sometimes, we just need to open ourselves up to understanding. You may not know all the details, but the fact that you've seen this figure means you are connected to it. Your energy, your presence, is what brought this image to light." Jessica thought about her father's accident, the strange voices he had heard afterward, and how he had never really talked about it with her. What if this figure was part of that, a piece of the puzzle he had kept hidden all this time? Could it really be something he was supposed to deal with but never had? Lydia continued, "I can help you understand more, but you will need to trust the process. Sometimes the answers come in unexpected ways. Are you ready to face what might be revealed?" Jessica's heart pounded as she nodded. "I'm ready. I need to know the truth." Lydia closed her eyes again, her hands resting on the table in front of her. She began to speak in a quiet, soothing voice. "I want you to focus on the photo, the one you took with your father. Look at it in your mind, and imagine the figure behind him. Let your thoughts go beyond the picture itself. Don't be afraid of what you might see." Jessica closed her eyes, trying to clear her mind. She pictured the photo in her head, the sunny park, her father smiling beside her, and the blurry figure just behind him. It was still so vivid, the feeling of someone watching them, even though there was no one there at the time. The figure had been so close, but why had she never seen it before? Why was it only in the photo? As Jessica focused more on the image, she felt a strange sensation wash over her. It was as though the photo was alive, the figure shifting and moving within her thoughts. She could see a shadow now, a faint outline that almost looked like it was reaching out toward her. She gasped, her heart racing. "Do you see it?" Lydia asked softly. "Can you feel it?" Jessica nodded, her breath shaky. "Yes, it's like it's coming closer, but it's still so blurry. I can't make out its face." "That's because it doesn't want you to see its face yet," Lydia explained. "It's still waiting for something, and when it's ready, it will reveal itself. But for now, trust your instincts. What do you feel when you look at it?" Jessica's mind was spinning, but something deep inside her told her to keep going. She felt an overwhelming sadness from the figure, a deep sadness that seemed to reach out to her. It wasn't angry, it wasn't threatening. It was lonely, lost, and in need of something. "I feel sadness," Jessica whispered. "It's like it's waiting for something." Lydia's eyes opened slowly, and she nodded. "That's the key. The figure is waiting for your father to acknowledge it, to face whatever happened in his past. It can't move on until that happens. And you, Jessica, are the bridge between the past and the present." Jessica's mind raced. Was this figure truly connected to her father's accident? Was it something he had never dealt with? The idea seemed almost too unbelievable, but everything Lydia had said made sense. She felt a deep, unsettling connection to the figure, as if it was calling to her for help. Jessica took a deep breath. "What do I do now? How can I help?" Lydia smiled gently. "The first step is to talk to your father. Help him open up about what happened to him after the accident. Only then can both of you understand what this figure wants and what it needs to move on." Jessica drove home with her mind in a whirlwind. Lydia's words echoed in her head. The figure is waiting for your father to acknowledge it. She had to talk to her father, but how could she bring it up? She had no idea how to start such an important conversation, especially after everything he had been through. But deep down, Jessica knew it was the only way to understand what was happening. When she arrived at home, she found her father sitting in the living room, reading the newspaper. He looked up as she entered. "Hey, sweetie. How did it go?" Jessica stood by the door, her heart racing. Her father's warm smile made it even harder to bring up the subject. But she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was waiting for her to ask. She had to know the truth. "Dad," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to ask you about. It's about the photo I took of us at the park." Her father put the newspaper down, concern flashing across his face. "What's wrong with the photo?" Jessica sat down across from him, taking a deep breath. "I've been thinking about it, and I saw something in the picture, a figure standing behind you. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, but now I'm not sure. Something about it doesn't feel right. And then, I saw something in the park today, like a shadow, almost like the same figure." Her father's face grew pale, and Jessica could see the discomfort in his eyes. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked down at his hands, as though deep in thought. "Dad," Jessica said gently, "I know you've been through a lot, but I need to know what happened after your accident. I think it's connected to this figure." Her father's eyes slowly met hers, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability in his gaze. He sighed deeply, rubbing his face. "I've never told you the whole story. After my accident, I wasn't the same. I heard voices, whispers. They seemed to come from nowhere, and at night, I would hear things moving around in the house. It scared me. I didn't want to scare you, so I kept it to myself. But something felt off. It felt like I wasn't alone, even when I was." Jessica listened closely, her heart pounding. "What do you mean? Were the voices trying to tell you something?" Her father nodded slowly. "Yes. They were calling to me, telling me that I had to face something from my past, but I couldn't understand what they meant. I thought I was just hearing things, the result of the accident. So, I ignored it. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder. And eventually, the shadow. It came." Jessica's eyes widened. "A shadow? Like the one in the photo?" Her father nodded. "Yes, it wasn't a person, but it felt real. It followed me everywhere. I tried to get rid of it, but it stayed with me. It wasn't until I finally talked to someone, a therapist, that I started to understand what was going on. The shadow, the voices, they were connected to the guilt I carried. I had never forgiven myself for the accident. I felt responsible for it, and that guilt kept me trapped in the past." Jessica sat quietly, absorbing his words. She had never known the full truth of what her father had gone through after the accident. She had always seen him as strong, someone who could handle anything. But now she realized how much he had been carrying alone. I think the figure in the photo is connected to that, her father continued. It's a symbol of everything I've been running from. The guilt, the fear, the memories. I've never truly faced it, but it's time I did. Jessica reached out and took her father's hand. You don't have to face it alone, Dad. I'm here for you. We'll face it together. Her father squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with emotion. Thank you, sweetie. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm glad you're here. The room fell silent for a moment, and then Jessica spoke softly. So, what do we do now? How do we get rid of the figure in the photo? Her father looked thoughtful. I think the only way to move on is to forgive myself, to let go of the guilt. Maybe once I do that, the figure will disappear. Jessica nodded. We can start by talking more, by facing it, like you said. The next few weeks were not easy, but Jessica and her father slowly worked through the memories and emotions that had been buried for so long. They talked about the accident, the pain, the fear. With every conversation, it felt like a weight was lifted off both of their shoulders. The whispers and shadows gradually faded. One day, Jessica looked at the photo again. The figure in the background was gone. It had vanished, just like the fear and guilt her father had carried for so long. The park was peaceful once more, and Jessica knew that her father had finally found peace too.